Shadows of the Moon, A Werewolf's Legacy, is a riveting urban fantasy novel that plunges readers into the enigmatic world of werewolves and ancient prophecies. Set against the backdrop of the mystical town of Elkwood, the story revolves around Sydney Quinn, a young woman whose life takes an unexpected turn when she uncovers a family secret that links her to a lineage of werewolves. Sydney's journey begins with a series of inexplicable events, including a harrowing encounter with a mysterious glowing beast. Drawn into a web of intrigue, she allies with the enigmatic Tate Graves, a werewolf with a haunted past and a heart of gold. Together they navigate through a labyrinth of werewolf politics, supernatural threats, and a centuries-old vendetta that threatens to destroy not just Sydney's newfound family, but the fragile balance between humans and werewolves. The novel is a thrilling exploration of self-discovery, forbidden love, and the struggle for acceptance in a world divided by prejudice and fear. Rich in detail and steeped in lore, Shadows of the Moon weaves a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable power of family bonds. With each revelation, Sydney must confront not only her destiny as a werewolf, but also the responsibility that comes with wielding ancient magic. As tensions escalate and alliances are tested, Sydney and Tate must unravel the truth behind a series of attacks plaguing their community, all while battling an enemy whose origins are as shocking as they are sinister. Can Sydney embrace her true nature without losing herself? And can love conquer the deep-seated hatred that has plagued their kind for generations? Shadows of the Moon, A Werewolf's Legacy, is a captivating tale that seamlessly blends action, romance, and supernatural mystery, promising an adrenaline-fueled adventure that will leave readers spellbound until the very last page. Chapter 1. There are rules in the world of stripping. Rule number 1. Don't use your real name. Catty Steele kept her voice and expression neutral despite the overwhelming urge to shake, scream, and shove the new stripper out the back door before she could make the biggest mistake of her life. She knew better than anyone that each person made their own choices. Not sure I would have chosen Bambi for my stage name. Personally would have gone with something a little more creative. The music from within the club vibrated the tubes of lipstick on the various vanity tables, and the air hung heavy with the stifling stench of cigarette smoke. Bambi is my real name. Bambi's chipmunk voice matched the look in her doe-like eyes. Good thing making money at a strip club didn't depend on the sound of one's voice. With platinum blonde hair and a body straight out of Hot Rod magazine, Bambi would make a lot of money. Isn't Catty your real name too? Bambi's perfectly plucked brows drew together as she blew a bubble with her gum. My real name is Catty. The invisible thread around her heart tightened, filling her with a burning pain. The old familiar ache associated with the reality of what she'd done, how she'd thrown away a normal life and cut ties to her country clubbish family to work in a strip club in New Orleans. The worst mistake of her life. I changed it to Catty when I started stripping. Ah. Bambi popped her gum and looked down at her costume, a dark green bikini with sequins across the top. She looked back up at Catty and smiled a childlike smile. I love green. It's my happy color. Catty wanted to tell her it didn't matter what she liked. It was all coming off in 10 minutes in front of some overweight guy with bad breath and grabby hands. Rule number 2. She held up 2 fingers. You can touch the customer, but the customer can't touch you. It was a rule few followed in the darkest corners of the club. She was one of the few, and that was why she avoided the shadows. But that's not what Meadow said. Don't listen to Meadow. She lowered her voice, letting Bambi know she was serious. Meadow was taking money for blowjobs in the back room. Catty might take her clothes off, but she sure as shit wasn't going to sell her body for all the money in the stripping world. Meadow will also tell you that you don't have to pay income tax. Which brings us to rule number 3. Always pay your taxes. The IRS is a bitch to deal with if you don't. Got it. Bambi looked over her shoulder to the far side of the dressing room, where Celine, the club manager, was watching them with an impenetrable glare. I don't think Celine likes me. She's already screamed at me twice, Bambi whispered. Celine screams at everyone. Don't piss her off and you'll be fine. It was rumored Celine had been a stripper years and years ago, but age and nicotine had not been kind to the woman. Being around gorgeous young women didn't help her ego. Bambi cast an unsure glance across her shoulder to the manager. It's not you, Bambi. Celine doesn't like anybody. Do what she says, stay off drugs and be here on time. She might not be anyone's Aunt Bessie, but she's fair and doesn't tolerate disrespect. 5 minutes, Bambi. Celine's husky voice cut through the noise of the dressing room. The dancers continued buzzing around the room, changing into the next costume, putting on another layer of lipstick and checking their boobs in the mirror. How do I look? Bambi propped her hands on her hips and waited expectantly. You need a smaller top. But this one is my size. She spread her arms and looked down her body. That's the problem. You need a smaller size. You need a top that your boobs spill out of. Guys aren't coming in here to see a Miss America pageant. They come here to see boobs. Lots and lots of boobs. Bambi, move your ass. The tone in Celine's voice had all the girls taking cover at their makeup stations. Here. Catty grabbed a tiny black bikini top off a hanger and tossed it at the girl. Put this on. But it won't match. Doesn't matter. She shot her a glare. Bambi obediently changed into the smaller bikini top. It barely covers my nipples. That's the point. Catty waved her away. You need to get going before you piss off Celine. Thanks, Catty. Bambi walked toward the stage. Another werewolf to the slaughter. Jill eased up beside her and gave her shoulder a nudge. Her light brown hair had been styled into long curls that cascaded down her back. Her makeup, complete with a smoky eye and dark red lipstick that accentuated her full lips, made her look like a model on a runway. She wore a barely there white halter top, bikini bottoms, and tall white boots. She looked like every man's erotic dream. Nah, she's not like us. She's human. Catty sighed and sank onto the stool next to her makeup mirror. Jill sat on a nearby stool, her light brown gaze assessing and cautious. You. Okay. I should have encouraged her to leave, to go home and never come back here. She looked in her friend's eyes. It's dangerous enough for females like us. Can't imagine being a human and working here. You know as well as I do she wouldn't have left. If anything, it would make her want to be here even more. Something flashed behind Jill's eyes. Something resembling regret. I know. No need to make her friend feel bad too. What do you have? Her gaze landed on a white gift bag perched in Jill's lap. It's a little something for you. Uncertainty flickered in Jill's voice. Catty couldn't decide whether it was excitement or nerves. What is it? It's my favorite stilettos. Jill reached in the bag, pulled out the coveted red shoes, and dangled them in front of Catty. I can't take those. They're your favorite. Besides, you need them to dance in. No, girl. That's the other part of my surprise. Jill put the shoes back in the bag and set it on the floor. She turned and took Catty's hands in hers. Tonight is my last night. You're leaving. Her heart stuttered and tripped in her chest. I've saved enough money for junior college. I start in a few weeks. I'm going to be a nurse. Her eyes and voice brimmed with excitement. Wait, what? Between the white noise buzzing in her ears and the music in the club, maybe she hadn't heard correctly. Try not to look so surprised. Jill chuckled. Catty forced the muscles in her face to cooperate into a smile. I can't believe you're leaving. She wrestled with the panic growing in her chest. Jill left, she'd truly be alone. I had no idea you were even interested in being a nurse. I just thought that I was content to be a stripper forever? Jill teased. No, I didn't mean it that way. She was happy for her friend deep down. Inside she truly was. She just didn't want to lose her. As you know, I had a pretty rough time. Being strung out half the time didn't help either. Jill lightly fingered the silver cross pendant hanging around her neck. So what made you decide to leave? Catty's heart beat a little faster. She wanted to know the defining moment of choosing a different life. I guess I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. Know what I mean? She lifted her chin and met Catty's gaze. Catty knew exactly what she meant. These past few months had her entertaining the idea of leaving for good. But she didn't have a solid plan. Where would she go? What would she do? It's not too late. Jill leaned in. You're not that pissed at the world, girl. Anymore, Catty. You need to leave and go live your life. I don't know. Fear gnawed at her gut. She couldn't go home. If her parents found out she'd become a stripper, they would be devastated. It was a paralyzing fear that kept her tied to this shithole. A tiny shard of hope rose up sharply in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she could get a do-over, a second chance, and change her life forever. She couldn't go home, but she could make a fresh start somewhere new. Girl, I don't even know how you ended up here in the first place, Jill whispered as she looked around. You're different than us, Catty. You were meant for way better things than this. You don't belong here. You never have. Catty shifted in her seat. How could she tell her friend she'd gotten into? Stripping because she wanted to be seen? To be acknowledged? Growing up in a family that was all about high standards and achievements had been like a prison. She'd chosen this career out of her own selfish need for validation. It all seemed so childish now. The pain of her brother finding out what she'd done was enough to suffocate her in guilt. Leave, Catty. Jill lowered her voice. You know as well as I do these wolves here are up to some seriously bad shit. Not even the Guardians can help us. Not that they even come in here anymore. She glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice even more. I've heard rumors that any dancer seen with a werewolf outside this club will be punished and the wolf killed in front of her. It's not right. If Big Mike is willing to kill a male what makes you think they won't do the same to you, honey? The number of werewolves far outnumbered the humans at the XXX. To her boss, the humans posed no threat. It was the worst he watched. She knew Big Mike didn't mind the girls dancing for the werewolves as long as none of them got involved. But this was the first she'd heard he would kill another male. Catty blinked back the sting of tears. Getting involved with Big Mike had been the biggest mistake of her life. They were no longer dating, but her gut told her he wouldn't hesitate to hurt her if he was pushed to that point. Here, you need this more than me. Jill unhooked her necklace and pressed the cross into Catty's sweaty palm. Catty let out a shaky laugh and studied the cross gleaming under the lights. You think God can save me? She'd been forgotten by God a long time ago. Jill grinned. God can save your soul, no doubt about that. But the silver will save your ass. Chapter 2. Lucien Savage held a 2x4 over his head and nailed it into the skeletal wall. He blinked the sweat out of his eyes and wiped his grimy forehead. The blistering Arkansas sun was unforgiving, branding everything it touched with fingers of heat. It was hot. Hot as fuck. You need help with your wall? Jackson walked over and held out a water bottle. Lucien gritted his teeth, shook his head and kept hammering. I don't need your help, Jackson. He never did. He preferred doing things on his own. It's about time you got your lazy ass out of bed, Lucien added. The rest of the Guardians have been here since 6 working. You're 2 hours late. He didn't keep the irritation out of his voice. The heat combined with Jackson's interruption made him almost unbearable to be around. Not to mention he was roasting in his leather jacket. Being a werewolf didn't help matters since his body temperature ran a few degrees hotter than a human's. It's not like I'm getting paid to be here. It's for charity. Jackson tugged his shirt over his head and tossed it on a stack of lumber. You better get used to manual labor, pretty boy. Skylar is hoping once this house gets up and running she can build more like it to help house abused girls. Skylar was the mate to the Guardian Zane. After being abused as a child, Skylar wanted to protect other girls, so she'd started her own charity, Skylar's House. And even if you don't have a charitable bone in your body, you should be concerned about the bet you made with Damon and Jaden. If they get their walls up today before us, we're buying their beer. The heat in his body matched the heat in his tone, and it took all his restraint not to punch Jackson for including him in the stupid bet. Instead, he hooked the hammer in the waist of his jeans and grabbed another 2x4. The quicker he could get done, the quicker he could leave. He could almost feel his blood thickening with each drop of sweat squeezed through his pores. Relax, man. We can still win. You're just letting the heat get to you. Jackson shielded his eyes with his hand and leaned against the pile of neatly stacked lumber. It's hot as hell and you're still wearing that damn leather jacket. Fuck off, Jackson. Lucien's words came out fiery and explosive, and to a stranger it would have been a warning. But Jackson was no stranger and he certainly didn't heed any warnings. Always the Lone Ranger. I don't know how you do it, bro. I bow to your badassness in all your black leather. Jackson bent at the waist and gave him a mock bow. What are you doing, Jackson? Kissing Lucien's ass. Barrett Middleton, Pack Master of Arkansas and leader of the Guardians, walked up with a load of lumber balanced on his shoulder. Judging by his tone, he was clearly not amused. He's being annoying as hell. Lucien grabbed another piece of wood and nailed it up. By the way, Jackson, badassness is not a word, dickhead. Lucien would love to take his jacket off. He would love to be hauling wood around in nothing but jeans and boots. He would love to be like the rest of the Guardian brothers. But he wasn't like these Guardians. He was different. They all had futures. His had been stolen by someone he trusted. With his life, he couldn't trust anyone, and without trust he could never truly be part of their brotherhood. Not now. Not ever. Dickhead isn't a word either. It's slang. Jackson opened a box of nails and handed it to Lucien. Dickhead's a word. Lucien picked up another piece of wood and prayed the werewolf would just leave him alone. He liked alone. He's right, Barrett deadpanned. No shit. Jackson turned and gave Barrett his full attention. Barrett whipped his phone out of his back pocket and hit a few buttons one-handed. He turned, shielding his phone from the glare of the sun. The lumber swung in Jackson's direction. Jackson ducked just in time to avoid getting whacked in the head. Watch your wood, man. Jackson backed up a few feet and scowled. Believe me, Jackson. You're the last person on earth I want touching my wood. Barrett's dry tone pulled a reluctant smile from Lucien. Barrett looked back at his phone. Dickhead. Insulting term for people who are stupid or irritating. Synonyms include asshole, bastard, cocksucker, motherfucker. Cocksuckers in the dictionary? Jackson eyed the phone. Dude, does it matter? Lucien cast a glance at Damon and Jaden. They were almost finished with their walls. You're lagging behind. Can I see that? Jackson grabbed for Barrett's phone, but the Packmaster held it out of his reach. Don't even think about it, Barrett warned. Jackson was constantly pushing the boundaries with the Packmaster, and Lucien couldn't understand why Jackson couldn't just keep his head down and work. Life was not one big joke. Hey Damon, did you know cocksucker is in the dictionary? Jackson yelled out across the worksite as he walked toward the others. Yeah, right under Jaden's picture. Damon hammered a nail into the wood with one hit. Quick as a snake, he drove another nail. Hey Lucien, looks like you're buying the beer tonight. Jaden smack talk had Lucien bristling. You want us to send Jackson back over there, or you want us to keep him? We could use some amusement while we win. Keep him. Lucien hammered another piece of wood into place. He swiped his hand across his wet forehead. Maybe he'll distract you guys and I can catch up. A little past noon, Lucien walked past the line of Harleys to the truck. He grabbed an ice-cold water out of the cooler, leaned against the tailgate, and took a long pull from the bottle. His sharp gaze took in the steady hum around the worksite and the acres and acres of sprawling green land surrounding the future home for at-risk girls. Nostalgia washed over him, reminding him of childhood, of family, of home. Barrett climbed out of the driver's seat and made his way to the back of the truck. It's odd. Lucien straightened and stuck his hands in his pockets. His carefully guarded thoughts had slipped out as words. What's odd? Barrett grabbed a water and joined him at the tailgate. The pack. He shrugged, trying to loosen the weight that had suddenly settled on his shoulders. It's more of a family than most people have. It was more family than he'd ever have. True. Barrett, as usual, kept his tone neutral. It was hard to get a read on his Packmaster. Barrett never spoke of his personal life or where he'd come from. It didn't make much difference to Lucien. Barrett had a reputation as one of the most respected and trustworthy Packmasters of the southern states. Carried a lot of weight with Lucien. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes blood will let you down. Barrett's voice carried an undercurrent of an unspoken secret. A secret only they shared. They're not supposed to. Heat flared in the center of Lucien's chest and spread like a trail of gasoline, growing and licking at his heart. He downed the rest of the water, hoping the coolness would quench the anger that had been building beneath the surface for years. If you stop expecting shit from people, then they stop disappointing you. Barrett crossed his arms and kept his gaze on the Guardians, assessing the work of his men. Lucien's breath grew too fast, too hot, too ready to fight. Righteous anger settled over him like an old musty blanket threatening to cut off his breath. You don't understand. My future was taken from me. My destiny stolen. Barrett pushed off the truck and stepped in his space. One of Barrett's qualities was never showing emotion. But now, standing in front of Lucien, emotion was written all over him, from his pissed-off expression to his hands curled into fists. Barrett leaned closer, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. No, you don't understand. You're expecting something you won't ever get. It's one thing to cut someone out of your life, but you've not even done that. You keep expecting something from your brother you won't ever get. It's going to destroy you. You have a family here in this pack. This is your family, your real family. He owes me. He spat the words out and anger boiled in his heart. Your bitterness where your brother is concerned will be your Achilles heel if you don't watch it, Lucien. Your wounds will always be there. But if you keep this up, it will scar your soul and then there will be no coming back from it. Be better or be bitter. You can't be both. Make up your fucking mind. Barrett shot him a glare and then walked toward the front of the truck. Anger pounded in his chest like fists in a bar fight as he watched Barrett get in the truck and drive away. Rage pulsed under the surface of his flesh and all he wanted to do was shift. He refused. He needed to remain in control. He squeezed his eyes shut and trapped the wolf inside. What's up, man? Braxton slapped him on the back. Lucien growled and rounded on his fellow guardian. Whoa, bro. Braxton held up his hands in defense. My bad. His eyebrows drew together. He searched Lucien's face. Everything okay? Braxton, the werewolf with the sleeve tattoos and blue hair, had recently been inducted into the Guardians. He knew from what Braxton had shared that his family life hadn't been pretty. In some aspects he could relate to the guy. Sorry, Braxton. Lucien swallowed back his rage. Anything I can do? Braxton eyed him carefully. He shook his head. No, I'm good. Just need to get back to work. He walked back to the worksite and picked up his hammer. Busy was good. Busy kept him distracted. Busy kept the ghosts from his past from resurfacing. Chapter 3. Lucien stopped in front of Barrett's office door, knocked and stepped back to wait. Right after they were finished working at the construction site, he'd gotten a text from Barrett saying he needed to see him. He scanned the hallway for the other guardians but realized he was alone. His scalp prickled, and the sensation spread down his torso and settled in his gut. The door flew open and bounced off the wall. Fuck. Riker stormed out into the hallway. His narrowed gaze landed on Lucien, and he stopped, nostrils flared and teeth bared, looking like a wild animal, ready to kill. Lucien's stomach tightened. He didn't get involved in any of his pack brother's business, but he knew Riker had some beef with Damon after he'd been inducted into the pack. Afterwards Riker had made himself scarce and the pack never saw him anymore. Until now. Riker. He glared at the whir and didn't bother holding out his hand in greeting. He'd learned better than to let his guard down around anyone, even his own pack. Keeping his eyes trained on Lucien, Riker reached for Barrett's door and slammed it shut. The ear-splitting sound echoed in the cavernous hall. Lucien bowed up to the whir, his adrenaline spiking like mountains in his veins. If you have an issue with me, Riker, I suggest you speak. Otherwise, I'm due for a meeting with Barrett. Riker growled and stepped into his personal space. Lucien's heart jackhammered in his ears as he curled his fingers into fists and prepared to set Riker straight if he decided to start swinging. So he sent for you, did he? The scorn in his voice echoed the contempt in his eyes. Riker's words sent an angry chill straight to Lucien's core. If you have a problem with me, then let's settle this right now. Ryder glared, spit on the floor, and then stormed toward the exit. Don't mind Riker. He's just hungry. Missed lunch. Come in, Barrett's bored voice called out from behind his massive office door. Lucien looked up and around, searching for a camera before opening the door. And stepping inside. He couldn't find one, which meant Barrett either had it cleverly hidden or he had ears like a bat. He stepped inside the packmaster's office. Despite the lack of furniture in the room, other than the essentials of a desk, a bookcase, a couple of chairs, and the state seal on the wall, Barrett's presence always seemed to make the office smaller than it was. You needed to speak to me? The tone was more guarded than he liked, but after what Riker had said, he knew this was no ordinary meeting. Barrett nodded at the empty chair, and Lucien took a seat. I did. Barrett tore his gaze away from the computer screen and opened the folder lying on his desk. This is a delicate matter. His hard gaze bore into Lucien's. What I'm about to tell you is confidential. You aren't allowed to discuss this with any of the other guardians. Understood. The muscles around his gut twisted ever so slightly like someone turning a screw. His eyes tracked Barrett and time slowed as he waited. None of the guardians. Barrett glared. Something was off. Way off. Usually Zane knew everything that was going on. As Barrett's second in command, it made sense for him to be included on the details. As you know, I'm not exactly an open book when it comes to the Guardians. Whatever you have to tell me is safe. That's part of why you're here and no one else. The muscle in Barrett's cheek worked as he continued to glare. Some Arkansas Guardians are missing. What do you mean missing? Every muscle in his body tensed. They are being captured. Barrett's gaze narrowed into slits as a muscle continued to work in his cheek. Something happened today that confirms my suspicions. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a metal box. The sharp coppery scent of blood made Lucien's stomach turn. Whatever was inside was not good news. Barrett flipped open the lid and the overwhelming scent of blood and flesh flooded the room. Barrett's face twisted in rage as he pulled out something that appeared to be a sheet of leather. Fuck me. Lucien stood and fought back the bile rising in the back of his throat. Is that what I think it is? Flesh. Barrett laid out the large piece of skin across his desk. The signature wings and eyes of the Guardian tattoo stared back at them. Whose is it? I'm running DNA tests to confirm, but from the looks of the two scars on the lower back it's Jaime, our Guardian in the lower part of Arkansas. Jaime was a Guardian in his mid-40s who had never settled down and made it. He'd been with the Arkansas pack since he'd turned 18. He always had a quiet fierceness about him that Lucien respected. What the fuck happened? Someone skinned his tattoo from his back. Barrett fisted his hands still, stained muddy red from the grotesque flesh. You mean someone did this to him? On purpose. Rage boiled up in his chest and spilled into every vein until his body hummed. Yeah, and I don't think he's the last. Barrett growled low and deadly. He turned, drew back his arm and pounded his fist into the wall, shaking the room and leaving a large dent in the cinder block. Where's the body? Lucien forced the words out. The pain Jaime had endured must have been unbearable. Lucien shifted in his seat as his leather jacket slid over his back, reminding him of the pain he'd once suffered. Can't find a body. Barrett's low voice hummed with anger. To kill a Guardian was the severest offense. Punishment involved a slow, tortuous death. To desecrate a Guardian by skinning off his tattoo was unheard of. This went beyond anything Lucien had ever encountered. Jesus Christ. Lucien scrubbed his hand over his face. Jaime is the second Guardian within a month to go missing. Barrett walked over to the bookcase on the wall. I suspect whoever did this has the other missing Guardian Mitchell too. How did you get that tattoo? Lucien stilled as a shiver ran up his spine. It was mailed to me. I had to sign for it at the post office. I thought it was some bullshit paperwork. Barrett pulled out a book and faced him. Rage flashed behind his eyes despite his otherwise calm expression. He was a storm about to blow in. Lucien knew his packmaster hid his rage pretty well, but he had no doubt the guy wanted blood and he wanted it now. This letter was inside. Barrett pulled out a soiled sheet of paper from within the book and pushed the document across the desk. Lucien unfolded the crinkled parchment paper. His nostrils flared at the scent of blood and dirt. The hunters have become the hunted. What the hell does that mean? Lucien dropped the letter and shoved the disgusting message back across the desk. Someone is targeting the Guardians to take us out. Do you think it's humans? Unease raised the hair on the back of his neck. The U.S. government knew about their existence and even employed the most lethal werewolves for their special ops teams in the military. But if the general public knew of the werewolves' existence, then there would be an all-out witch hunt for every werewolf alive. According to my sources at the government, it's not the humans. Barrett set his gaze on the Arkansas symbol that decorated his office wall and which promised to protect the pack. Feels more like another pack targeting us. And no other Guardians know about this? You and Riker. For now. Barrett turned. That would explain Riker's behavior. Barrett's expression was grim and unflinching. That's how I want to keep this thing. No need getting all the other Guardians up in arms. I'm sure as soon as they find out about Jaime, shit's going to go sideways and they're going to want to go vigilante. I can't have that. Not until I have all the facts. Why tell me? Why not tell Zane? He's second in command. Because I have a mission for you, but I want you to think this over before you give me your answer. I'll let you sleep on it tonight. I don't need to think about it. I'll do it. Lucien met his gaze. Barrett shook his head. You don't understand, Lucien. This is not your typical mission. What do you mean? Lucien frowned. The mission is out of state. Barrett crossed his arms and studied Lucien. I would be sending you down to New Orleans. Lucien's blood went icy. Louisiana. His home state. Why Louisiana? I've heard some rumors about a recent lack of guardians down there. Edward Boudier hasn't mentioned it, and I'm not ready to approach him. As you know, we are not on the best of terms. Lucien knew Edward Boudier, the Louisiana packmaster, was still pissed at Barrett for putting the Louisiana assassins in their place. Tensions were still high between Arkansas and Louisiana. Before you answer, take tonight and think about it. You need to know this is not your typical mission. You'd be going alone. No backup. Barrett gave him a hard look. And you wouldn't be going as a guardian, so I will not be alerting the packmaster of Louisiana of your visit. Everything we're doing is breaking the rules. I guess it helps I don't have the guardian tattoo. His back seemed to itch. In agreement. There is that. Barrett looked away. If you were caught having the tat, would be like signing your own death warrant. Barrett settled on the edge of his desk and crossed his arms. His blue eyes seared into Lucien's. Your past and what happened to you in Louisiana is the reason I hesitate to even ask you. I can do my job without my emotions getting in the way. Lucien clenched his jaw until it ached. Maybe, but what happens when you run into someone from your past? Your brother perhaps. What are you going to do when that happens? Will you be clear-headed and emotionally removed enough to remember the bigger picture? Here, Lucien. He knew what he'd do if he saw his brother. Maybe this mission was fate's gift to him to finally settle the score. Barrett held up his hand to stop him. Lucien slammed his mouth shut. Lucien, this unresolved issue with your brother has not gone away. When you came into this pack, I saw great potential in your future. I still do. But in order to embrace your future, you've got to let go of your past. Irritation flickered in his gut like a sore that wouldn't heal. I understand better than you might think. Barrett pushed off the desk and walked around his desk. He continued to stand as he stared down at Lucien. Your lack of forgiveness for what your brother did is only punishing yourself. Do you think it keeps him awake at night? Do you think he gives a second thought to what he did? The flicker in his gut tightened. Or do you think he's gone on with his life? This doesn't define me, he argued. Doesn't it? You still won't take your shirt off in front of the other guardians. It was 100 degrees today, and you kept your leather coat on. Hell, even Damon was running around shirtless, and you know that asshole is in love with his leather jacket. Barrett shook his head. I don't want an answer tonight. I want you to sleep on it. Come back in the morning with your answer. Lucien got to his feet. He already knew what his answer would be. If you decide to go, I'll need you to check out some of the strip clubs in New Orleans. I've had some intel passed along that we might have someone on the inside who might know what's going on. It's a female werewolf. She's from Arkansas, so we might be able to count on her loyalty. Anyone I know? Perfect. A manipulative female who couldn't keep her clothes on. Barrett gave him an odd look. Yeah, it's Zane's sister, Catty. She goes by the name Catty now. Shit. He ran his hand through his dark hair. Shit's right. The last thing I need is Zane going down there to try to find his sister. They're not in a good place. And I need someone level-headed who's not personally involved with her. He gave Lucien a pointed look. Now you see why I can't ask Zane to go or even let him catch wind of this. Yeah. He nodded and stood, shoving his hands in his jeans pockets. Like I said, go get some sleep. Come back tomorrow morning and let me know your answer. Lucien held his gaze and took a deep breath. Fine. But you already know what my answer will be. This is my home state now, and this is my pack. He walked toward the door. But I'll do what you asked and sleep on it. Lucien stepped out into the hallway and closed the heavy door behind him. His heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, matching the parading thoughts in his head. His mind wandered as he headed toward his quarters. Some of the guardians had places of their own actual homes, but for the single guys who were still unmated, the barracks seemed the logical choice. State-of-the-art gym, indoor pool, hot tub, and rooms rivaling a 5-star hotel. It was a pretty sweet hookup, and it was free. He never did see a need to buy a house off the base. It wasn't like he'd ever be mated anyway. Females preferred the whole package and he was damaged. He'd realized a long time ago that mating was not in the cards for him. Bitterness crept up his chest and wrapped around his heart. Damon had Ava. Braxton had Kate, Jaden had Haley, and Zane had Skylar. Seemed like within the past year so many of the Guardians had partnered off and mated. Hell, Jaden was taking it a step further and marrying his female as well. He wanted to make sure Haley was his in both werewolf law and the human law. Not him. His destiny had been stolen by his brother in Louisiana years ago. He fought back a cruel smile as his heart pounded. He would finally have his chance, his opportunity to find his brother and make him suffer as he'd once made Lucien suffer. Finally, after all these years of waiting, he would get his chance to settle the score. And he'd take his payment in Chapter 4. Catty opened the door to her cramped studio apartment and smiled when the familiar scent of jasmine candles greeted her. When she'd first moved in, she'd noticed a stench whenever it rained. The landlord continued to give her excuses with no solutions, so in the end she'd bought as many jasmine-scented candles as she could afford to drown out the mildew smell. She dropped her bag on the floor and shuffled into the kitchen for a hot cup of tea. She rolled her shoulders and reached her arms over her head, stretching out the tight muscles in her back. She lifted the hem of her t-shirt and sniffed. She normally reeked of cigarette smoke and liquor, but with the Louisiana heat at an all-time high, the overpowering smell of body odor clung to her clothes. She stifled a gag and walked to the window and threw it open. It wasn't just the stench of the club that turned her stomach. Working as a stripper made her want to vomit too. She was ashamed to admit stripping hadn't always had that effect on her. In the beginning, she'd liked the way men looked at her with lust and adoration when she stepped on stage. In the beginning it had filled a void in her chest that hadn't been filled in a very long time. In the beginning, stripping had been fun. When Big Mike, the owner of the Triple X, had taken an interest in her, she'd been flattered and had thought he truly cared about her. He'd showered her with pretty words and pretty flowers. They'd quickly developed a sexual relationship and she'd thought it was the real deal. But as time passed and she witnessed how he couldn't stay faithful, she'd realized she didn't mean anything to him. So she'd broken it off but continued to work in the club because she couldn't find another job. His attention had quickly turned to the newest stripper who came into the club looking for a job. She learned the lust and adoration men felt toward her never turned to love. The men wanted her body and what she could give them. She was a fantasy. She'd contemplated returning home to Jonesboro, Arkansas to her parents' house, but she never followed through. She'd listened to Big Mike when he told her she was worthless and that her own parents would disown her after she'd shamed the family by taking her clothes off. She'd believed him. And in the end she stayed. Her fingers brushed the cool metal of the cross. Jill. Before she'd left the club, Jill had given her one last hug and whispered in her ear, "Don't be ashamed of your story, Catty. Your mistakes will inspire others. Sometimes you have to just let go and take that first leap of faith." A thick heaviness settled over her heart. Jill would go on, reach her dreams and make a difference with her life. She'd probably find a mate, settle down and have a family. Unlike Catty. Peeling off her clothes, she walked toward the bathroom. The tea would have to wait. She needed to get the stench of the strip club off her body and out of her soul. "I accept this mission. What do you need me to do?" Lucien had made it to Barrett's office before the sun was even up. "This is completely under the radar. If the other Guardians ask where you are, I'm telling them you're on a road trip on the pig trail." Barrett took a sip of his coffee and met Lucien's gaze. "But we're already short-staffed. They're not going to believe you." Lucien had heard chatter among the Guardians about having to pull overtime. They weren't going to like it if he was suddenly gone on vacation. "They won't dare question me." Barrett reached in the desk drawer and pulled out a cheap throwaway cell phone. He tossed it to Lucien, who caught it. "Use this if you need to report in. Leave your personal cell phone behind." Adrenaline spiked his veins. He studied the floor as something stirred in his gut. "I know it's always bothered you, Lucien, that the ink wouldn't take over your charred flesh." His lips stretched into a sarcastic smirk while his eyes hardened. "I was going to say scar." Barrett narrowed his eyes and sat back in his chair. "As I mentioned yesterday, the fact that you don't carry the Guardian tattoo is one of the reasons I'm sending you. You'll discover that what you Consider a weakness is your biggest strength on this mission. You don't need anything that will identify you as a guardian. His heart gave an angry squeeze and pumped hot blood through his veins. Every time the guardians were initiated, it was Barrett who took them to Jonesboro to get their guardian ink. When it had been his turn, Barrett had made the show of taking Lucien to the moon goddess despite knowing the tattoo wouldn't take. His first thought had been that Barrett was doing this to embarrass him, to shame him because of his deformity. Barrett had told the tattoo artist Matt he was going to do Lucien's tat himself. Once they were alone in the tattoo shop, Barrett turned to him. He said he knew Lucien's back wouldn't take the ink. He told him his heart and dedication to being a guardian meant more than just some fucking ink. He'd locked the door and turned on the TV in the corner. They'd spent hours playing video games, neither saying anything other than the occasional curse word when they managed to get killed in the game. Hours later they headed back home to Little Rock. Remember this, Lucien? Barrett's voice broke his train of thought. You watch your ass like never before. If someone in New Orleans even thinks for 1 second you're a guardian, you make damn fucking sure you change their mind. Do whatever it takes. You're going to be alone on this trip and I need you to make sure you get your ass back here in one piece. We clear? Crystal. He wouldn't get caught. He had a lot of work to do, including finding his brother. Barrett narrowed his eyes and then looked away. There's more. What? I didn't tell you everything yesterday. Barrett put his elbows on the desk and leaned in. There was a list in that package with the names of all the Arkansas guardians. They'd crossed off Jaime's name, and they put a star by Mitchell's name. So they are hunting us. So it would seem. Barrett's eyes hardened. Your name was missing from the list. A mixture of emotions, part relief, part offense, rumbled around his chest. That's why you're sending me. I'm invisible. Hatred for his brother grew. Silence stretched between them. This isn't an easy assignment, Lucien, Barrett said. That's why you gave it to me. To make sure it's handled correctly. He stood and stuck out his hand. Barrett gave him a tight shake. I won't let you down. I never thought you would. Jackson watched from the shadows as Lucien entered Barrett's office. Usually, when there was a meeting, they were all included. Not today. Lucien had joined the Guardians not soon after he had. He felt like Lucien had held himself back, kept himself from really being part of the pack. He suspected it had to do with whatever fucked up past the werewolf continued to drag along with him. Jackson knew what it was like to watch someone haunted by their past until it swallowed them up like a giant crater. Shit was cancerous. Ate away at your soul until you were a walking zombie. He didn't want that for Lucien. He glanced at his watch, then bent his neck from side to side, stretching out the stiffness in his muscles. He contemplated for a brief second, knocking on Barrett's door. But he knew better than to bother his packmaster when he had a meeting behind closed doors. Barrett would rip Jackson a new one and make him enjoy the trip to the If Lucien needed to talk, then he knew where to find him. Home sweet home, Lucien mumbled as he pulled into the busy city of New Orleans a little after 4. The heat from the engine of his Harley rose up and mingled with the heat from the asphalt. Sweat beaded and rolled down his head to his t-shirt, where it was quickly soaked up in the cotton material. The streets were lined with motorcycles, and he knew the dangerous pull of New Orleans had made them gravitate to the city. The light switched to green and he revved his engine, heading in the direction of Bourbon Street. The plan was to scour the city before heading over to his hotel. Barrett had made arrangements for a low-rent room because he'd look out of place in a high-end hotel. He needed to keep a low profile and gather information, then find his brother and take his revenge. The smells of Cajun food and hurricanes saturated the thick air as he passed by rows and rows of restaurants. He knew the aroma wouldn't last. The second he got near Bourbon Street, he would be faced with the familiar scent of vomit and urine from last night's partiers. He turned the corner onto the notorious street. The stench hit him and he grimaced. With his heightened sense of smell, it was overpowering as the odor baked in the summer heat. He wondered how humans could even stomach walking down the street. New Orleans, home to the all-night bender and never-ending street pissing contest. And they think animals are nasty, he grumbled and pulled into a parking lot. Killing the engine, he set the kickstand and eased off the Harley. He slid his assessing gaze across his surroundings. People moved at a slow pace, wandering, drinking, and laughing. They seemed immune to the heat. The temperature bore down on him like a demon from the sky as it tried its best to bake him alive. His lips curled into a slight smile as he imagined Jackson standing beside him, bitching about him wearing his leather jacket in this southern heat. Jackson wouldn't hesitate to rip off his t-shirt and walk around bare-chested in the city for all the females to admire. The sounds of car horns, the heartbeat of jazz, and the rumble of laughter reminded him of an old familiar friend. It had been a while since he last visited New Orleans, but suddenly he found himself back in the flow of things. New Orleans, attractive and inviting, and once it got you liquored up and addicted to the sounds of the street, you had to make a choice. Stay or leave. Unfortunately, he'd never had a choice. It was taken from him along with his destiny. Now he had a chance to make things right. Now he had the chance to settle a score. Chapter 5. Finally. Food. Barrett eased into the chair at the head of the dining room table. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten all day. Between attempting to gather intel on why his guardians were being targeted and getting a positive DNA for Jaime on the tattoo, he hadn't had the time or the appetite for food. Where's Lucien? I made a coconut cake for him, his favorite. Granny frowned as she looked around the room while the Arkansas werewolves took their seats around her table. Said he was taking off for a while. Jackson's sharp tone had Barrett cutting his eyes at him. Said that he was heading to the pig trail. Pigtail? I haven't heard of it. Granny pursed her lips and looked at her grandson Jaden. What's the pigtail? Is it a strip club for large women? Don't think Lucien needs to be at some strip club. Jesus, Granny. It's called the pig trail, not pigtail. Jaden scrubbed his hand across his face. Damon snorted. Jaden, watch your language. Granny's eyes almost disappeared behind the wrinkles in her frown. Barrett sat back in his seat at the head of the dining room table and watched the interaction with slight interest. He knew his guardians wouldn't have the balls to ask him where Lucien was, but there was one werewolf who wouldn't hesitate. Barrett. Granny turned her hawk-eyed gaze on him. Where's Lucien? And she never disappointed. Where he said he was. Riding the pig trail. He forked a large piece of roast beef onto his plate. Eating Sunday dinner at Granny's house had become a tradition for their group. Since Granny had moved to Arkansas from Louisiana, the guardians had kind of adopted her as their matron figure, or mascot. He couldn't decide which. Why are you making Lucien a cake? Why does he get a cake? Jaden mumbled as he spooned a healthy helping of mashed potatoes onto his plate. Haley, his mate, slapped Jaden's hand when he dug in his spoon for another helping. Save some for someone else, Jaden. Yeah, Jaden. Quit being a pig. Damon's tone smacked of sarcasm. No, really, Granny. Why did you make Lucien a cake and not me? I'm your grandson. Jaden's brows drew together and he stabbed a piece of meat onto his fork. It's not your birthday. When it's your birthday, I'll make your favorite cake, too. Or trifle. You do love my chocolate trifle. Granny patted his hand before passing a large bowl of green beans to him. Damon snorted and whispered something to Jaden that sounded like, pussy. Barrett shoveled a forkful of buttery mashed potatoes into his mouth, grateful. He was left out of this conversation. The less he said, the better. It's Lucien's birthday? Jackson's head jerked up. He looked around the table. I didn't know that. I don't think he wanted anyone to know. I had to drag it out of him while I was in line at the grocery store. That boy is more tight-lipped than you. Barrett. She pointed her fork at him. Lucky bastard, Barrett mumbled and then shoved more potatoes in his mouth. Guilt ached in his stomach. Maybe he shouldn't have sent Lucien on such a dangerous mission since it was his birthday. Who was he kidding? If he hadn't sent Lucien, then a lot of them might not see their next birthday. He'd had no choice. It had to be done. That's probably why he wanted to go ride the pig trail. To celebrate his birthday. Damon shrugged. Hey, we should go. Ava, Damon's mate and all-around troublemaker, brightened and elbowed Damon in the side. We should ride the pig trail. Damon gave a lustful look at Ava. How about I ride you instead? Damon. No sex talk at the table. Granny pursed her lips and then held up a finger. Unless it involves my new line of vibrating panties. Just like that, his appetite was gone. Barrett threw his fork down and pushed away from the table. Catty woke to the rhythmic, hypnotic strains of jazz drifting up from under her window, played by a lone saxophonist. While tourists and some New Orleans residents might find this a lovely way to wake up, she did not. Every time she heard the sounds of saxophone music, it made her stomach twist into knots. For her, it meant another night of working in the club. The light outside had faded to a light purple, soon to slip into inky darkness of night. Soon the energy of the city would change, become something darker, something stronger. Turning over, she grabbed her phone. 8:15. She blinked, remembering what day it was. Tonight was her night off. She lay back and stared up at the ceiling. Her mind wandered to her friend. Jill was leaving, getting out, starting over. It was something Catty had longed to do but hadn't dared voice, too afraid if she spoke it out loud it would disappear like wisp of smoke. Like a wish on a birthday cake, those hopes had to be kept silent until they grew into reality. Her phone shrilled to life. She grabbed it off the nightstand, composed of a stack of second-hand books. Hello. We had one of the girls not make her shift, and we're going to need you to come in and work. Celine's raspy voice made her heart sink. It's my night off. I haven't had a night off for 2 weeks now. Her stomach twisted. She'd planned on treating herself to dinner at Muriel's Jackson Square, her favorite restaurant. The club needs you. Celine's brusque tone was sharp and unrelenting. She caught the meaning behind Celine's words. Big Mike found out she didn't show up for work, he might take it out on her with his fists. He'd never laid a hand on her, but she'd seen some of the girls after they'd refused to come in for a shift. They'd been short one night and Mary had had the night off. She'd made plans with some friends who were in town. When she said she couldn't cover the shift, Big Mike had done a number on her. It had taken her 2 weeks to heal from the bruises on her face. She shuddered and cleared her throat. I just woke up, so it will be a while before I'm ready. Good girl. Make sure you look extra nice tonight. There's a urology conference in town tonight, so we are expecting a big crowd. She flung the phone across the bed and stared at the piece of plastic. She contemplated tossing it against the wall and breaking it into a million pieces, so she couldn't be reached. But it wouldn't matter if she had a phone or not. Big Mike would find her. She kicked off the thin sheet wrapped around her legs and climbed out of bed. The weathered hardwood floors were cool to the bottom of her feet as she padded to the tiny bathroom. She turned the water on. Quickly shedding her t-shirt and panties, she stepped into the shower under the spray of tepid water. She longed for a day when she could have a steaming hot shower. Her studio was old and the water only got warm, but at least she had running water. Tepid water was all she had. She would take it. Hell, she'd take a freezing cold bath in the middle of an Alaskan river if she needed to. One day, maybe one day, she wouldn't have to have water to wash away the sins on her soul. Maybe one day she'd be white as snow. Another one? The pretty blonde bartender nodded at his empty beer bottle and gave him a sultry grin. Sure, Lucien said. She went about the business of popping the top off another bottle and sliding it toward him. He didn't miss the invitation in her eyes, but he wasn't interested. He was here on business, not to get laid. You new in town? She rested her arms on the counter of the bar and leaned forward, pressing her large breasts up over the top of her skin-tight shirt. Passing through. He took a drink of his beer. The icy liquid cooled his dry throat but did little to cool the rest of his body. Passing through alone? Her eyebrow shot up as she ran her tongue across her lips. Yes. He kept his tone cool and averted his gaze, hoping she would get the hint. Well, if you need anything, come see me. I'm working all week. She grinned and straightened as a waitress approached and gave her a drink order to fill. Know of any adult entertainment that might pique my interests? Barrett didn't know the name of the strip club where Catty worked, so he hoped the bartender could give him a place to start. Yeah, there's the XXX Club down the street, the waitress interrupted. Ignoring the dirty looks the bartender was shooting her. Strippers mainly. But if you want to pay for a little more, I've heard the girls are willing. But it's a rough club. She looked him up and down and shook her head. But I get the feeling you are used to rough hangouts. He chuckled as he caught the scent of Wolf on the waitress. The bartender narrowed her eyes at the waitress before heading down the bar to fill her orders. Thanks, he mumbled before pulling out a couple of 20s. For the strip club info or blocking Lisa? She nodded at the bartender before looking back at him. For both. Name's Lucien. I'm Helen. She leaned close. Be careful, Wolf. When I say the club is rough, I meant rough for other werewolves. I've never seen you before, so I'm assuming you're not from here. She lowered her voice. There's been rumors about a lot of illegal stuff going on in the club. If you're looking for a piece of tail, then go down to the next bar over. It should be easy for you to get laid with. The bad biker vibe you're giving off. I'm a big boy. I think I can handle myself. Did the illegal shit involve missing guardians? Then you need to be even more careful. New Orleans is not what it used to be. She cast a worried glance around. It would be wise to stay away from humans as well, no matter how hot they are. She nodded at the bartender. I'm not interested in her. Yeah, well, here in the Big Easy, women have a hard time with the word no. She straightened as the bartender set a couple of hurricanes down on her tray. See ya around. She whisked the tray up and skirted the nearest table as she made her way toward her customers in the corner. It was his cue to leave. He'd gotten a lead. He didn't need to stick around anymore to give the bartender any hope she was getting into his bed tonight. He hated to break it to her, but there had yet to be a woman who could lure him in with just one look. It would take much more than a hot body and a pretty face. It would take an angel. Chapter 7. Fuck. Catty hurried to the dressing room. Did he hurt you, Catty? Celine wrapped her bony fingers around Catty's arm and halted her escape. The woman might be old, but she had a grip like a vice. I'm fine. She forced her mouth into a semblance of a smile and tried to shrug out of Celine's ironclad grip. Celine narrowed her eyes into snake-like slits and released her hold. Don't sound fine. Don't look fine either. You look like you've seen a ghost. No ghost, but she did catch a glimpse of her past. I'm okay. Really. Her voice cracked, betraying her despite the heavy smile. She held in place. You're not on your game tonight, girl. Celine let go of her arm and pulled out another cigarette she kept tucked behind her ear. Sticking the slender stick in her mouth, she lit up and took a long pull. Catty squinted as the woman blew a long stream of gray smoke in her direction. She fought the urge to fan the smoke. She didn't need to give the woman another reason not to like her. Celine didn't like anyone, but once you got on her bad side, she made life a living hell. Look at you, dark circles under your eyes and hands shaking like a leaf. Knew you needed a night off. She took another long drag, angled her head away from Catty and blew out a stream of smoke. So why did you call me in? Celine's eyes softened, and for once she gave Catty a look of pity. It was the closest thing to a smile she'd ever received. The boss can't make money when all the pussy looks like they've been beat to shit. Celine rubbed her brow with her thumb while she clasped the cigarette between two fingers. I need to get ready for my next dance. Catty clenched her jaw. Celine leaned into her personal space. Your eyes are looking mighty red. Bet you're getting pink eye. She uttered a curse. Work until midnight. Then you're off. You've got the next 3 days off. I need you rested and in good shape when you get back. Celine ran her astute gaze up and down her like she was assessing a side of beef. Thanks. It wasn't an olive branch, but she'd take what she could get from the old bat. She dodged the other strippers as she made her way back to her seat in front of the vanity table. The first time she'd sat at the little table with a mirror lined with large white bulbs, she'd pretended she was a famous model, getting ready to walk down the runway. She'd held onto the delusion until a few months in, when she kept getting her ass smacked or her boob grabbed by drunk patrons. Reality set in the night she was approached in the parking lot and offered $20 for a blow job. She was nothing more than a piece of pretty ass for men to look at. She'd been a fool to believe she was valued. To them she was a means to an end, not even a person. And now, having someone here in New Orleans who knew her family was another issue. While Arkansas and Louisiana weren't far apart, wolves tended to stick within the boundaries of their state. When she'd first left Arkansas for NOLA, she'd worried her family would find her, but after a while it became clear they had no interest in looking for her. It should have made her relax, but all it did was create a fissure in her heart. Now a stranger in black leather showed up and wanted to talk to her. And who the hell wears leather in the middle of summer in New Orleans? If she didn't show, he could track her down. Unease snaked up her body as she stared at her reflection. She should have left this morning. She should have taken what little money she had, bought a bus ticket and gotten the hell out of this cursed place. But she couldn't. She had to have a plan and money before she made another impatient move. She wasn't going to make the same mistake of running off somewhere with no money, no idea how to support herself and no place to live. Those days were over. She needed a plan before she left. Fear tightened its fingers around her heart. And now it might be too late. Lucien stared up at the ceiling from his cheap-ass hotel bed as sweat pooled underneath his body. The rough sheets scraped against his soaking wet back with every rhythmic breath he took. "It's hot as balls," he murmured and wiped his forehead with the sheet. He'd been gazing up at the ceiling since he'd gotten back from the strip club, trying to come up with a reason why Catty Steele was still on his mind. Every fucking time he closed his eyes he saw her. Not just her face either. Hell no. He saw everything. From the skimpy G-string to the boots and bra she'd stripped off in front of him. The thought of her had him hard in 3 seconds. The fact that a perfect stranger could do that to his body had him white, knuckling the sheets while his breath turned to a pant. She's only a woman. Nothing special. He moaned and swiped his hand across his sweaty brow. The air conditioning in the room was out, and the ceiling fan was going the speed of a turtle. Something about Catty sent his instincts on high alert. With Catty he knew he needed to be wary. He needed to be watchful. He needed to be on his guard. Fuck it. He threw back the sweaty sheet wrapped around his legs and sat up. The aged wooden floor on the bottom of his feet did nothing to cool his body. What he wouldn't give for a 5-star hotel. He stood and stalked toward the window. Opening it, he stuck his head out. A sticky slap of humidly hit him in the face like a wet rag. Even after the sun went down, there was no cooling off in the Crescent City. The smells of asphalt and Cajun food and the occasional putrid whiff of someone losing their dinner after too many drinks hit him like a wall. He rested his hands on the top of the windowsill and stared down into the city. That did not sleep. Neon lights from bars and glow sticks around the necks of tourists lit up the street while music blared from nearby clubs, street musicians and passing cars. It was almost 3 o'clock in the morning and there was still a steady traffic of people looking for their next adventure. He remembered a time when he'd actually enjoyed visiting New Orleans back when he was a kid. His family had been in Louisiana for years and was highly thought of. His father, Robert, had inherited his wealth through the family shipping business and the railroads. He was always out of town on business while his mother had stayed at home and raised their 2 sons. She was the Martha Stewart of Werewolfs. She kept a perfect house with maids and a chef. And like clockwork, every 3 years she would have the house completely redecorated. When she wasn't decorating, running a charity, or hosting parties, she was busy chasing after Lucien and his brother, who were always hell-bent on doing whatever they wanted and always getting into trouble. But that was a long time ago. A time before his world had gone upside down and his family had been destroyed. Now all New Orleans was to him was a reminder of pain and devastating loss. He rolled his shoulders to alleviate the tightening in his flesh that started at his shoulder blades and traveled down to his waist. He growled, pushed off the window and headed for the bathroom. He'd shower and get ready to meet with Catty if she didn't bail. As he crossed the room, his reflection caught his eye. He stopped and turned on the lamp. The light illuminated the room in an eerie play of dark shadows and shapes. He turned his back to the mirror. He narrowed his eyes as he gazed upon the scarred flesh that had been burned so many years ago by one of his own blood. His deformity had caused him such great pain and loss. The mottled skin seemed to tighten as he took in the length of his scarred back. The pain of being burned had faded, but the hatred against his brother still burned bright. No one had ever seen him naked, not even the other guardians. He would wait to work out until the gym on the base was empty, and even then he'd dress in a long-sleeve tee. His secret had almost been discovered by Jackson. Jackson had stumbled in one time after working a 48-hour shift and discovered him lifting weights. Lucien had soaked his shirt when Jackson had slapped him on the back. The asshole had apparently been too damn exhausted to notice the unevenness of his flesh. After cracking a few jokes, Jackson had headed back to his room. It was something Lucien kept to himself. He couldn't trust his secret with the other guardians. He'd be an outcast. He'd experienced it with his own family. He wasn't about to experience it with his pack. He'd learned the only person he could trust was himself. Chapter 8. Coffee and beignet, please. Catty gave her order to the waitress at Café du Monde. The restaurant was already buzzing with the voices of customers, ordering the sugary donuts and chicory coffee. People didn't visit New Orleans without at least one trip to Café du Monde. She didn't usually treat herself to the city's renowned delicacies, but with her meeting with the stranger in only a few hours, it might be her last day alive, so she was going to enjoy her last meal. There was something lethal about the worst's eyes, the way he carried himself. Fear had paraded down her spine when he'd grabbed her, but when he'd started talking about her family, that's when shit had gotten real. Her family knew where she was. They knew what she was doing. She couldn't imagine her father allowing her to come home, not with the amount of shit she'd landed in. She was covered in it. She studied the plate of beignets and the cup of black coffee in front of her. She stirred an ample amount of creamer and sugar into her coffee to mask the bite of chicory until the coffee was the color of caramel. She took a sip of the hot brew. Ah, that's good. She bit into the confectionery sweet and sat back in her chair, watching the city come alive around her. The majority of the shop owners had not opened for business, and traffic was sparse. The morning had a soft gray glow that covered the sidewalks in a dreamlike state. If she were a tourist visiting the city, she would be enjoying herself. But she wasn't. She was a captive. Her stomach clenched and she dropped the half-eaten beignet on the plate, her appetite gone. In a little while she'd be meeting the werewolf in Jackson Square. She wasn't sure what he had to tell her, but she knew it had to be bad. Like a phone call in the middle of the night bad. Maybe her dad was sick? Or her mom. Maybe something had happened to Zane? She wiped the sugar off her fingers with a napkin and thought about her big brother. She'd been a pain in his ass when she was a kid. She knew because he'd told her plenty of times. She'd always gotten the feeling Zane was more tender-hearted than he let on, that he put on a tough facade because her dad expected it. Her lips tugged into a smile as she thought about the times she'd sneak into his bedroom when it would storm outside. She'd always hated thunderstorms. She wasn't scared of the thunder. No, she was afraid of the lightning. It would flash at the right time on the right shadow and she would start imagining her dolls coming to life and trying to climb into her bed to hurt her. She would pad quietly over to Zane's room and crack open the door. She'd done it so many times he wouldn't say anything. Just wave her in with his hand and pull back the cover. They'd sleep back until the early morning, and then she'd head back to her bed before her parents would wake up. She'd had a picture-perfect life growing up. She'd lived in an affluent neighborhood and made friends easily enough. But she didn't really find her best friend until the day she met Skylar. Skylar was beautiful with bright red hair and big, curious eyes. She'd seen her out in her front yard in front of her trailer. Catty had cried and screamed to play with the little red-haired girl until her mother had finally relented and turned the car around. Even at young age, Catty had known how to get her way. That moment had led to Skylar coming over to her house about every day. Skylar had a totally different personality from hers. Skylar liked to coordinate her Barbie's clothes, making sure everything matched, while Catty preferred them to look dramatic, mixing colors to make them stand out. Skylar would put away the toys when they were finished playing, while Catty didn't want to waste time doing something so menial. She always had another game to play, another adventure to explore in the backyard, or another way to irritate Zane. She didn't like to wait or she might miss out on something. At the time she didn't realize Skylar was different in other ways too. While Catty was a gray wolf, Skylar was a red wolf. Red wolves were mortal enemies of the gray wolves. Race didn't matter to her. Skylar was her friend no matter what. Although her friend had never spoken about her home life, she knew it wasn't ideal. Not by any means. I thought I said Jackson Square. The deep masculine voice made her jump in her chair. You said 6:30. It's only 6. She pressed her hand against her chest, as her heart thump-thump-thump-ed against her palm. No time like the present. He grabbed her elbow and brought her to her feet. Let's go. Don't touch me. She didn't keep her anger out of her voice. She snatched her arm out of his grip and gathered up what was left of her breakfast to toss it into a nearby trash can. He shadowed her every step, the heat of his body almost suffocating. She turned and glared. Haven't you ever heard of personal space? Making sure you don't run. His tone was hard and flat and unapologetic, making him an easy wolf to hate. Where would I go? The words left a bitter taste in her mouth and hit all too close to home. She curled her fingers into tight fists, her hands thrumming with each pulse of blood. It's not like I could outrun you. Let's go. He motioned with his hand toward the direction of Jackson Square. She hurried across the crosswalk before the light turned green. She didn't need to glance over her shoulder to see whether he was following. She could feel him. At this early morning hour, few people were hanging around. Artists hadn't even started setting up their highly coveted places around the square. Here is fine, he growled. He stopped behind the shadows of the shrubbery and trees in an attempt to hide his large frame and crossed his arms over his massive chest. He was larger than the majority of the wers she'd been around, with large broad shoulders that moved with the agility of a large lethal safari cat. He wore dark jeans, black biker boots, and a white t-shirt stretched within an inch of its life. She wasn't sure if he was trying to show off his muscled body or if the department store didn't make a shirt in his size. With his size, it was probably hard to find clothes that fit. He still had on the same damn black leather jacket she'd seen him in last night. A bead of sweat curled at his temple, and she knew he had to be sweltering. If not now, he would be once the sun was high in the sky. She wanted to tell him he didn't need the coat for intimidation. He was intimidating without it. She met his gaze and shifted her weight, digging the toe of her tennis shoe in the dewy grass and staining the white canvas green. His dark blue eyes, almost a cerulean color, bore into hers. His face was handsome enough, but the glare he was giving her tempered her thoughts on his physical appearance. His raven-colored hair brushed the tops of his shoulders. A rogue breeze ruffled his locks, sending his male scent directly to her personal space. Her body tensed and something stirred deep in her belly. Shivers raced through her system and she wasn't sure whether it was from fear or attraction. He smelled like no wolf she'd ever come across. Right then she knew she was screwed. Avocado flavor. Can you believe it? Jackson held up a woman's green thong and waved it under Barrett's nose. I thought they only made candy-flavored thongs. You would know. Barrett gritted his teeth and shoved the lingerie out from his line of sight. It was bad enough he was trying to keep everyone in the dark as to where Lucien was, but now Granny had invaded the barracks, armed to the teeth with edible undergarments. They make all kinds of flavors, not just candy, Granny stressed to the group of interested wers. There's chicken and waffle, taco and refried beans, and don't forget bacon. If you can put it on a potato chip, then they can put it on a thong. The slight headache that had started at his temple when he'd seen the old lady barging in was now building up to a migraine. She'd said she was dropping off some snacks for his guardians. He hadn't realized she was dropping off thongs. Bacon's pretty good, Jaden growled with a red thong hanging out of the corner of his mouth. His canine worked the garment like a dog working a barbecue rib. Hey, pair it up with this avocado and see how that tastes. Jackson tossed the green thong and Jaden caught it one-handed. Jaden stacked the underwear together and began to go to town on them. What did I do for karma to put me in this hell? Barrett mumbled to himself. He had a lot of shit to worry about besides standing around all day watching Jaden slobber over a pair of panties. Why would you even bring those here? He shot the old woman a look. Because I ordered the jelly bean assortment of thongs and bras. Granny pursed her lips. Those idiots at the factory messed up and sent me the football fantasy ensemble. Her eyebrows furrowed to the point they almost got lost between her wrinkles. And my ladies don't want a bunch of underwear that smells like a Super Bowl party. I don't know. These things are pretty damn good. Jaden's eyes glazed over as he finished off the crotch. That's what you think until you see the reviews. There have been more accidents with this package of thongs than you can shake a stick at. Granny propped her hands on her skinny hips. What do you mean? Jackson stopped chewing, dropped the underwear and gave Granny his full attention. There are reports coming in by the droves that men are going wild with lust. Once they start eating, they can't stop. Why, one woman in Mississippi got her big toe bit off by her husband who wouldn't wait for her to pull her undies. He smelled bacon and went in for the kill. Barrett felt a bit nauseated. What did the woman do? Jaden asked as he reached for another pair out of the taco-flavored box. Apparently it wasn't the first extremity she'd lost. Lost her pinky finger when she was helping her husband set traps for nutria rats. Damn, she got her finger caught in a trap? Barrett winced. Not exactly. When she went back to check the traps there was a live nutria. Rat. That sucker latched onto her pinky finger and snapped it right off. Like biting into a candy bar. Damn. Jaden cringed but reached for another set of underwear, obviously intrigued by Granny's storytelling. Now she's trying to sue the company for an unsafe product and for being traumatized. Said her husband couldn't help himself. He was attracted to her. Drawers like a bee to honey. Sweet Jesus, Barrett mumbled and scrubbed his hand down his face. Jackson snorted. Granny, please, Jaden implored. I think she's trying to make a quick buck. Any woman who goes trapping nutria. Rats with her husband knew what she was getting into when she purchased those bacon-flavored drawers. Granny glared. So why did you bring them here? Barrett rubbed the bridge of his nose. His headache was now approaching hurricane strength and he wouldn't be surprised if he blew an aneurysm. On the bright side, if it did happen, he wouldn't have to listen to Granny and her bacon-flavored thongs, and he would be put out of his misery. The company doesn't want me to send them back. Said they're not going to make them anymore. Too much bad publicity. So you lucky boys get them. She picked up a cardboard box, opened it, and spilled the contents out onto the table. Colorful thongs, green, pink, and red, decorated the table like a strip club on Mardi Gras. Try this. It's the waffle and chicken flavor. Granny held it out to him with a smile. You look like a waffle and chicken kind of guy. I'm not. He scowled, hoping to scare the old woman into quiet submission. Taco. She offered him a red thong. No. He shook his head and struggled to keep his voice calm. Look, you can't keep this stuff in here. I'm not running an adult store. Besides, he had bigger fish to fry, like trying to keep his guardians from getting skinned alive. I think Lucien would like the waffle. Jackson picked through the thongs spread out on the table. Speaking of which, how much longer is he going to be gone? He met Barrett's steady gaze. As long as it takes. He narrowed his eyes, daring Jackson to push the issue. Silence stretched between them, and Jackson finally shrugged and went back to eating. In the meantime, you boys eat up. Granny clapped her hands and smiled.